I knew how to read a chart and how to carry a sleeping toddler without waking them, but nothing in medical school teaches you how trust looks when it's quietly siphoned away. I'm Laura Palmer, pediatrician, married to Daniel. He's a lawyer. That line matters later, I promise. Mother of two. And I had been away for several months on a consulting rotation. We rolled back into my childhood town in late August. Daniel, the kids, me, the big suitcases, and a cooler full of takeout my mother insisted we eat before she wanted them back. For the last 5 years, I'd been sending $6,700 twice a year into a joint account designated for my niece Lily's college fund. It was a number I typed into our banking app on autopilot, $6,700 every 6 months, like paying mortgage, like paying tuition in advance for a person I loved. It was small in the mathematics of our household, but enormous in the architecture of a future. A week after we arrived, Lily, all earnest cheeks and scholarship essays, cornered me in the living room with a stack of college brochures. She talked about applications, majors, the financial aid nightmares she'd read online. I smiled, the professional smile you use when you want to be both encouraging and correct, and said, "Use the fund I've been putting away. Make that money work for you." She blinked at me, confused, and said, "What money?" Time does a funny thing to the body. My fingers went cold, but my voice stayed steady. I watched the moment recede into a smaller room inside my head where systems fail and numbers don't add up. Across the kitchen, Ashley, my older sister, always the louder one at family gatherings, was mid-laugh with Mark, her husband, pouring wine like every bottle was proof against worry. I gave Ashley a look I'd learned to use on worried parents. Neutral, assessing, unamused. She met it for a heartbeat and then shrugged like a weather change. I laughed, a short, brittle sound, and made a joke about Lily's mysterious trust fund to keep the living room warm. Everyone accepted the joke. Lily accepted it and moved the conversation back to colleges. That night, I lay awake and ran the numbers in my head the way I run labs, twice a year. $700, 5 years, automatic transfers. Something smelled. Not like betrayal yet, just the faint metallic tang of error. I told myself I'd handle it the way I handle a troublesome diagnosis. Gather data first, dramatics later. But under that prognosis was the thing that made it personal. This was my niece's future, and for years I had been paying into an account that, at least according to Lily, didn't exist for her. I didn't storm the house with a torch and a binder of accusations. I did the thing I do when a lab value looks wrong. I went looking for the numbers. I started where most sensible people start with money, at the bank. Because I'd been the one depositing the $6,700 semi-annually, the account had my name on the transfer schedule and a paper trail in my email. That meant I could open the app, pull the statements, and, with Daniel's quiet legal calm on speakerphone, call the bank's fraud line. We need a temporary freeze, I told the agent, using the sort of voice clinicians use when referring a patient for urgent imaging. The freeze went through within an hour. If you've never watched an account get frozen, it's a small, satisfying procedural drama. No fanfare, just a corporate eyelid closing. Then I moved the remaining balance out of the frozen joint account and into a trust account I had set up for Lily years ago, the one with my name as trustee, because I'd insisted on the paperwork when Ashley and Mark said, "We trust each other." I changed passwords, revoked app access, and blocked future transfers. I left a polite, formal message on the joint account for Ashley. "Please contact me regarding Lily's funds." It felt sterile, precisely what I wanted. Emotion could wait for evidence. Evidence is an addicting thing. Once the freeze was in place, the receipts and charges fell into my lap like confessions. I printed PDFs, screenshot credit card statements, matched wire transfers with contractor invoices. There was a $10,000 line item for a kitchen renovation with a contractor's name I'd seen at family barbecues, a travel confirmation for 2 to Hawaii booked in April, multiple restaurant charges that could have been dinner with clients, and a string of purchases to a boutique, one of which matched the model of the handbag Jessica, Mark's sister, had started carrying like a billboard. Ashley's lucrative job had apparently been paying for other people's vacations and a new backsplash. It wasn't pretty. It was desperate. The receipts were interleaved with late fees and cash advance transfers that read like a family trying to patch a ship with duct tape. Mark's credit line showed a near call on a second mortgage. There were emails from a mortgage broker with tentative figures. Lily told me, voice stiff, that she'd almost quit soccer because she couldn't afford cleats. I told myself Mom would help, she said, and then blinked at me because she didn't know whether to be angry or relieved. She had watched us overcompensate. When Ashley posted glamour shots from the Hawaii trip, the captions read like an apology disguised as boast. Needed this after a busy quarter. And I felt my stomach flip with sick understanding. The deeper I dug, the more the narrative clarified. This wasn't theft for sport. It was theft for survival, and that made it worse. Ashley and Mark had been living beyond whatever income they actually had, convincing everyone, including themselves, that a mysterious new job had covered the gaps. Instead of asking the family for help, Ashley diverted the money meant to build Lily's future into maintaining an illusion of security, renovations, vacations, gifts for a sister who enjoyed designer handbags, dinners that pretended to be investments. To an outside observer, it looked affluent. To Lily, it looked like a fund that never arrived. I remember the moment the analytic detachment broke and the personal did its small, loud work. I held a spreadsheet where every transfer for 5 years was a row, and I could see exactly when the direct deposits stopped landing where they were supposed to. Numbers have a way of turning excuses into explanations. I felt anger. Yes, but also a prosaic sorrow. Someone had been at the business end of a system failing them and chose a route that stole a child's choices. Before I emailed the ledger to myself and printed a copy for Thanksgiving, before I rehearsed how to say the words that would break a family, I locked the accounts tight and sat under the kitchen light, eyes stinging from too many PDFs. There was no thrill in being right. There was only a fierce clinical duty to the person who mattered most in that ledger, Lily. Thanksgiving looked like a Norman Rockwell painting someone had photoshopped with too many candles. The table groaned under mashed potatoes, my mother's cranberry relish, and a pumpkin pie that smelled faintly of cinnamon and past habits. I carried a hardcover binder to the head of the table, like it was an offering or a scalpel. Both felt accurate. I set it down, closed it with a soft, deliberate thud. The room shrank. "The ledger," I said, because names help people understand what you intend to do. I'd printed 5 years of transfers, reconciled them against receipts, highlighted where money left Lily's account, and wound up at contractors, travel agents, boutiques. I'd circled late fees and cash advances the way you circle abnormal labs. The binder wasn't theatrical. It was forensic. It looked like evidence because it was evidence. Ashley's face went pale in a way that deflated whatever performance of breezy competence she'd perfected for holiday photos. Mark sat forward, eyes narrowing in the way of someone reading a page he'd prefer not exist. Lily, who had been at the other end of the table, folding napkins like preparing for a small, secret ritual, stopped. Daniel, quietly brilliant with words that had helped other people in courtrooms, sat beside me, hands folded, not because we needed a lawyer, but because honesty sometimes wants a witness. I spoke plainly. "These are the deposits I made for Lily's college. These are the charges tied to that account. They don't add up the way they should." I let the sentence sit there like an X-ray on a light box. Ashley laughed first, the short, brittle laugh I'd seen at other breaking points. Then the edges fell away. She took the binder from the table with shaking hands and turned the pages like someone reading the obituary of an idea she'd once trusted. Her shoulders hunched. She started at the top, then looked up, and the words came out small. "I'm sorry," she said. It was paper thin, and then she crumpled into something much more human. Tears came the way they do when there's too much air in a body that's been holding a thing for too long. I thought I could fix it. I thought Mark's luck would have turned upwards by the time Lily was going to college. I told myself just one renovation, one trip, then a real paycheck, and I'd put it back. I convinced myself it was temporary. Her voice shredded. "I convinced myself you wouldn't notice." She said the exact line I had traced from the spreadsheets, the transfers, the late fees. And for a second, the house was only breathing. Mark's face went from the blankness of shock to the red heat of someone who'd let his pride steer a ship into shallow water. Lily looked like she was trying to reconcile two versions of the woman who raised her, the sister who taught her to braid her hair, and the woman on the invoice page eating up her tuition with vacations. Ashley's confession was not a tidy, cinematic collapse. It was a messy, real unraveling. She listed reasons: bad investments, a contractor who ghosted and then billed twice, medical bills she didn't tell anyone about. But there was a through line I recognized: fear sewn into choices that looked like safety. She had been trying to patch the illusion of stability with money that never belonged to the illusion. That's what she admitted, and it landed in the room like a dropped plate. Mark reached across the table, then seemed to remember he had to look at what he'd done. "I should have noticed," he said, and for the first time the businessman in him looked smaller than the person who'd been ashamed to say he was struggling. He apologized to Lily in a voice that sounded older than he looked. Lily, furious, hollow, brave, said, "You betrayed my future." It was simple and sharp and true. I didn't shout. I don't believe in theatrics where evidence will do the work. I told them what I'd already done. The account was frozen. The remaining funds were in a trust that had Lily's name on the signatory line with me as trustee, and I had copies of every transaction. I told them what would happen next. We would negotiate a repayment plan. Daniel would draft it formally. He cleared his throat and nodded like a man who hates paperwork as much as he loves a just outcome. And if Ashley needed help, real help, we would look for it. Not because I wanted to humiliate her, but because people who break trust out of fear need support to stop breaking it. I said the part that sounded like a sermon but wasn't. Family is the place you ask for help. If you'd been honest, any one of us would have helped. If you'd been honest, we'd have found cheaper contractors, a loan with better terms, sailed that storm together. But you siphoned someone's future for an illusion, and that's a breach you can't pretend is small. That's where trust and math meet. You can't compound a lie into a degree. Ashley sobbed and promised to make it right. Mark offered whatever time he could to help repair the financial damage. Lily, after a night of sleeping in the spare room and a morning of silence, let us sit with her while she opened the first envelope of the next application cycle. There was no grand reconciliation. Nobody filmed a montage. There was a long, tense conversation about boundaries, accountability, and a restitution schedule written in a legal tone that had mercy only where it was earned. Months later, the ledger was a quiet object in a drawer. The repayments went into the trust on schedule. Ashley arranged counseling and took a lower-paying, steadier job that matched the life she could afford. Mark learned to be less performative about success, and Jessica stopped pretending new handbags were consolation prizes. Lily stayed on the team. She kept playing until the cleats wore thin, and then bought new ones with a scholarship she had quietly earned through a summer program I'd signed her up for without fanfare. We turned numbers into plans and plans into repair. Thanksgiving that year was smaller and calmer. We still argued about the stuffing. We still laughed in ways that made the casserole tremble. The ledger taught us something blunt but useful. Honesty is the account you should never let run a deficit. I went back to work with a new folder of forms and a tired sort of relief. Family, I decided, is not a guarantee of softness. It's a ledger you keep with both your heart and your head.